What's up, gang? Welcome back to another History in Graveyards. Today I am at the Washington Crossing. Sorry I don't have my mic with me. I was just driving by and I figured I would check it out real quick for you. I haven't thrown any videos up recently, so I just figured I'd do this for you. So I'm standing on the exact spot of where George Washington crossed the Delaware River. Also, there's the visitor center. I'm going to go head back and shoot some footage in there so I can show you what that's all about, what's in there. Some pretty cool stuff, I think, but we'll find out and just enjoy some of these scenes at the Washington Crossing here in Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. Little trail used to be the road that the Army used. So cool knowing that Washington's troops used this trail. So awesome. Walking in history.
That bridge is about where Washington came across the river December 25th and 26th, 1776 to do Battle of Trenton, 9 miles away. The concept was there were 2,400 men coming over here and there were 1,500 Hessians, German troops in Trenton. But there were also supposed to be other troops coming over at other places. Now they came over here because this was a ferry business. They could ferry over the cannons and the horses and things like that. You could take the men over with boats just about anywhere, but if you wanted to do it all in one place, you would do it at a ferry business. So there's a ferry business here, and then one further down, one down by Trenton, and then beyond Trenton. There were 2 other sets that were supposed to come over. They couldn't make it because in those locations the river was even worse than it was here. I could go into more detail if you're interested. But at any rate, he's trying to come across, and it's the Pfeiffer in the movie says, a 16-year-old Pfeiffer, he says it rained, hailed, snowed, and froze, and at the same time blew a perfect hurricane. And he didn't mention the sleet that was coming down on occasion, and also the ice flows in the river. So you can imagine they're running 4 hours late, and Washington gets word finally that the other troops aren't going to make it over, and he's got men on this side, he's got men on that side, and the question is, do I want to go on ahead or do I go back? I'm sure he prayed about it, thought about it, and asked about it, and decided to go on ahead. Now, that was a pretty good thing because he needed a win, and he did have a win because enlistments were going to expire at the end of the year, about 5 or 6 days later. I always thought it was Christmas Eve he came over, but no, it was Christmas night into the next day. So if enlistments had expired, everybody went home, the army would have vaporized, and the country might have vaporized too. However, he did manage to get the men over, and they brought the men over in the Durham boats. Now, if you see the movie, or they reenact that once in Christmas every year and a week before, bringing boats over from the Pennsylvania side. They had these big canoes, 18-foot oars, and you can put about 40 people in a boat. You get them across. The originals had no seating because they were used for commerce up and down the river. They have seats in them for the reenactors, fortunately. Now, Going up and down the river was standard, but going across wasn't, because the current's trying to take you that way. So that was tough work to get those boats across. 40 men at a time on the average, because the boats were different sizes. 2,400 men went 60 boat loads, basically. They didn't have 60 boats, so they had to go back and forth quite a few times also. Now, you don't, however, want to put a horse into a canoe. Not a good idea. So they had these ferry boats. So there's a diagram of one. And if you walk down or drive down and ride the river, there's a replica down on this side of the river that I can tell you how to get to when you leave if you're interested. That, you see there's a line at the top that goes all the way across the river, which is stationary. You don't use it to pull the boat across. The boat connects up with two lines that have pulleys. Now, if you take the forward line and shorten it a little bit, and the aft line and lengthen a little bit, when the current hits the boat, it gets a little cockeyed, and as the current hits it, it helps to scoot it across the river to the other side.
Okay.
So they used that, they used poles, they used oars, whatever they could to get the ferry boats across. But that's how you could get over the horses and the carriages and the cannons and things like that. 100 horses, 18 cannon, that was the important part. Muskets, well, in the weather like that, they weren't really going to work too well, especially which army was going to be exposed more after you march 9 miles to Trenton. You're the one that's got the wet muskets. But the cannon, you can plug them up. There are only 2 holes where the ball comes out where you torch it off. Plug those up, make sure the ammunition and the powder is dry, and then when you get to where you want to go, boom, it works. So they did manage to go on ahead and surprise the enemy, even though they were after sunset by a few hours, sunrise. And with the 18 cannon versus 6, the battle was over in an hour and a half. That's pretty fast. And they got 900 prisoners of war out of the 1,500 that were there. Might have had more if the other troops had come across. So they brought those troops back this way. Some spent the first night or two here. Most were taken across. Enlisted men separated. The first night, officers had to sleep in McConkey's little hut. This is Johnson's Ferry House. McConkey's was the one on the other side. There were always, you had to have a place to land, so there had to be another ferry house. Johnson McConkey. There's Howell Yarley is the next one over, that sort of thing. So the enlisted men were sent off. The officers had to spend the first night in McConkey's little hut. He had a few little huts, but had to spend one in about the size of this room. And there were so many officers and so little room, they could not even sit down. They had to sleep standing up, and we have that on record. But we figured they were pretty warm in the process. Now, of all the buildings in the other park, you're familiar with Washington Crossing Historic Park in Pennsylvania. That's the park on the other side. That's a state park. This is Washington Crossing State Park in New Jersey, which is a historic park, so go figure. But anyway, of all the buildings over in that park, and all the buildings associated with the crossing in this park, the only one Washington could have even seen is this one, for one simple reason. It existed in 1776. None of the other buildings were here. Now, there were buildings here, but not the ones you see now. There's some foundations over in the Pennsylvania side that we think were here originally, but nothing above ground was here at the time of the crossing. We're 90% sure Washington came in here. You got a sleet storm, you got to reconvene, figure out what you're going to do. You're running 4 hours late, you're not going to surprise the enemy, you don't think. So what are you going to do? Well, why not meet in here where there's a fire going? That'd be a little bit, at least for the officers anyway. Yeah. So, and that's probably what they did. And it was probably so obvious that nobody bothered to record it. It's one of those duh type things. Well, this building is from 1740. That's when Johnson was here and built this place. Built like a tank. Nobody wanted to tear it down to build something better. Of course, they didn't have tanks back then, but really well, solidly built. You can see the ceiling's fairly high. If you are rich enough, you can have a high ceiling so that the smoke, when it comes out of the fireplaces and such, is up there instead of in your face. If we go upstairs, you can see that the ceiling is much lower. There are no fireplaces up there, so you don't have to worry about that. So here, that is the original floor and the original beams from 1740. We're walking on a layer on top of the original. And when you go upstairs, there's also a layer on top of the original, so we don't walk on the original. The doors are original. We think they've been flipped, so that was originally the outside. The doors are actually now 2 inches lower than they would have been, in that there was 2 inches worth of flooring put up, and they had to chop a little bit of the door. The doors are a little bit smaller than they would have been otherwise. The large pieces down here on this level are period pieces. They existed in 1776. Now, we don't know if they were in this building or not, but we've set things up so it's what a family business running a ferry house would have. Right there, you know, that is a period piece, this is a period piece. Now, this table and one in the other room are not period pieces because we still cook in the fireplace. It still works. So you can see these rings here. You wouldn't want to do that on your 1776 table. Not a good idea. It's a big fireplace. This is the winter kitchen. We think Washington would have been in this room, although the parlor is the other room, the fancy room. We'll get in there eventually. So he would have probably been in here. In the summer, they would cook in a separate outbuilding. Why heat your house when you don't need to, or even have the possibility of a fire? If you don't have to have a fire, let's not have one. Now, if you'd like, you can step into the pantry here on the left. I'll talk to you. Now, this part of the building was added on, but it was added on like 1765 or something, so it would have been here when Washington came here too. The room there, that wall, and upstairs there's some walls, were probably added on in the 1920s. This place was lived in through 1970s by caretakers. Oh, so that's why there's radiators. You see the wood top things, they're radiators. They weren't here in the 18th century, but they were here for the benefit of those who stayed here. In this room, the redware is mostly replica. The second shelf from the top has some period teapots on the left. The item hanging over the fireplace about eye level is a yoke for kids to wear to carry buckets of water. Because there's a lot of work to do around here. If you're not chopping wood or planting stuff or weeding stuff or whatever, you are doing something like that. Now, this little cubby hole is probably added on in the 1920s, trying to make it look somewhat period, but we don't know that it is. Probably someone who was, caretaker here needed an extra place to store things or something like that. In this room, we've set it up to be like an adult bed chamber. Your radiator, of course, we comes in here. There's the adult bed. There's the trundle bed that comes out. All the beds have these ropes. There's no box springs, of course, so if you were sagging a little bit, you use something like that implement there to tighten those ropes so that you're a little bit better off the next night. If you are cold down here, you have to remember there's 3 fireplaces, so that's nice. Also, you can take hot coals and put them in the foot warmers like those, or the bed warmer here. That is not a popcorn popper, it is a bed warmer. And then you be sure and take it out before you get in, so after you've warmed your bed up so you don't hurt yourself. Now, we also have these wooden shoes. They were Dutch, were the Johnsons, and the slacks after them. When the slacks were here, it was still called the Johnson Ferry House. So that's why you hear that, even though the Johnsons were not here anymore. These are wooden shoes made of poplar. They're very light. And I've been told, like the Dutch shoes, that they are essentially 18th century Crocs. Those plastic shoes that people wear now. So they were ahead of their time. Either that or they're 18th century steel-toed work shoes that are made out of wood instead of steel or something like that. If you're interested. So this is the best view of the river there. You can see Pennsylvania on the other side. New Jersey this side. That's the bridge where the cars are going. Right about there would have been that line that Washington and troops and horses and carriages, cannon would have come this way. There would have been another line a little further upstream going the other way, not as far as the island, however. And then probably between them, who knows, were the Durham boats trying to go across, or maybe they were further downstream a little bit in case they went too far, they wouldn't bang into the ferry. But we don't know. But on the other side of the street here, there's a little stone building, and that is a spring house. We don't think that one was here in 1800. They may have had one, or they might have just had the spring. The spring has been there. When the one fellow died, the place was sold. It was advertised as being a nice place with, among other things, a spring never known to fail. The beams up here, if you look, they have beads on them that go from wall to wall. Yeah. And of course, you don't add those on. You cut out what's between them, and it was done by hand. So that's fairly labor intensive. So this was a fancier room. This would have been the parlor. You would have entertained Washington or somebody else here. You take your furniture, put around the walls, and bring it out when you had company, and put it back later. You'd have a meeting, a Bible study, entertain visitors, maybe a wedding reception or something. I doubt it. A dance, you probably wouldn't have to bring them out. But and there's no sleep sofas that take 5 men to move, so you can do that. It's just not that hard.
Alright gang, so pretty much George Washington crossed right where the bridge is. I'm not sure when, but they found ropes that were the ropes that pulled the ferry back and forth, pretty much right where the bridge is. So that's the exact spot of where George Washington crossed. Okay, my battery's about to die. Maybe you can pause that real quick. But this is the exact spot of where George Washington crossed with his troops.